Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Issues of the Heart podcast. I'm your host, Brother Kobe.
I'm Rogers. And we're picking up today from where we were last time and talking about it's COVID vaccine, the mark of the beast, etc. And if you didn't watch that, I certainly will encourage you to go back to listen to it. It's definitely well worth the time and to give you a good foundation for what we're talking about today. One thing we didn't talk about last week, and this just being as transparent as possible, this whole thing, there's a couple of pieces that we should look at, because we talked about it from a biblical perspective, that it does not quote the mark of the beast. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But it became politicized very early, and it became a political deal, namely how the president handled it. And it became, quote unquote, patriotic to not wear a mask because people wanted to follow in really an occult following. It became patriotic to, quote, not get the vaccine. It was looked at as this is the, quote, either a global conspiracy, that the global elite, they want to kill people off, and and it just makes no sense because from one aspect, if this is the plan of the global elite to kill people off, then why would they turn around and give you a vaccine? Right. If I want you to die of hunger, why would I give you food? If I, you right there about to give in for hunger and you're about to die, why would I show up and say, hey, let me give you as much food as you want? That doesn't make sense. And then people get into, well, they want to kill you off and sterilize you and so forth. Well, again, the formula doesn't make sense. But in the vein, though, a lot of people felt that it became an issue where the Democrats, quote, created this, or they wanted all these deaths to take place so that Donald Trump would not win the presidency. And you can see where all that went. And then thereafter, the setup is that really, well, he is the savior to come riding in to help people. And unfortunately, even with the vaccines, yes, they did a wonderful job and, quote, Operation Warp Speed, saying, hey, let's try to get this sped up and so forth. People heard it, but because, quote unquote, it didn't happen, he didn't win the election. It became a deal where, you know what, hey, I'm not going to support something that I'm not going to get credit for. And so it became more politicized, and Republicans, many staunch Republicans, made it a political issue, as much as to say, well, this is all Democratic led, leftist led. When the election's over, you won't hear anything about it and so forth. And you can look, unfortunately, at a number of states where even now COVID is surging. In other places, you'll find that these are quote red states. And of course, and then in particular cases, many of them are in the South, so Bible believing, as you talked about before. And most, quote, evangelical Christians, you won't go and take a snake in hand, but there are some churches that they test their faith. They go get a rattlesnake and they say, hey, if you got faith, you can put your hand in there and you won't be bitten. Or if you get bitten, you won't die, because Jesus said you'll take up serpents and the serpents will not have power over you. Now, most of us will recall that, like, people out their mind. But again, the same deal you're doing with COVID, saying, hey, I'm going to fool with this deadly disease that is infinitely more dangerous than a snake bite. And I'm just, God's going to keep me. God's going to protect me. It's something to be looked at. Yes, and I do believe that God can keep us. I do believe that God can protect us. But God wants us to use common sense. You can't open up the jaw of a lion or alligator and put your head in to see what his throat looks like and say, well, God's going to keep me. God's going to protect me. That doesn't work. When you mentioned earlier, as well in the previous episode, even with natural remedies. And so I think, that's important. Natural remedies, they work, but I think it's important to keep in mind that they have their place. I heard one guy who was promoting using Listerine as a way to be able to, quote, to kill COVID. Okay, this was one of your natural medical missionary guys talking about using Listerine, and he has a couple different mixes up with some garlic and so forth. And hey, garlic is powerful, folks. It can definitely work. Listerine can help certainly do wonders. But again, in the aspect of, okay, this is going to be my treatment, that's not working. You have people now who are taking horse dewormer, right? They won't take a vaccine, but they'll get horse dewormer. And they're asking, the FDA seemed like maybe 8,000% increase in terms of orders. People, you won't take, quote unquote, a vaccine that's tested for human beings, but you will take horse dewormer and cow dewormer because someone said that this is going to work. And you get all these things that go out. And so we could go on and on with that. But I think it's important again, to look at some of history. And so I want to share a couple of pieces from history, because again, we talked about Ecclesiastes chapter 1, that history repeats itself. And so with that in mind, we want to share a couple of pieces with you from history so that we can learn from, and then easily draw the parallel to see, is it still happening today? So with that, let's look and see. All right, so this is a scene that took place, if you look at it, black and white, of course. It almost could be something like today, but it's like in the 1800s. And this is a riot, like 1885, riots that were taking place in Montreal. You can see the agitation and the concern there. Some of the children and so forth are being assisted by police officers going to be vaccinated. You can see some women in the background and men with clubs and so forth. Well, what's all this about? It's because they felt that, quote unquote, the vaccine should not be administered. No one should get it. You can see this as well. It was on an outrage on personal liberty. Montreal working men and women forced to be vaccinated. Does that sound like anything similar that you hear today? This is not like Montreal 2021. This is back in the 1800s, where the idea was, hey, this is an infringement. And so people are holding and forcing you to get vaccinated and so forth. Now, it wasn't that extreme, but the president had made a request to have health workers essentially to go door to door, really to educate people. And people felt that, okay, well, that's like the SS, the Gestapo coming by to make people get vaccinated. Again, it doesn't make sense. If that was the case, then they could roll up, actually have you have the vaccine and then just hold you down like you see in this picture here. Again, this is like hyperbole. This is what people, quote, made it into. So the government could go by and hold you down. They're not doing that. They're going by and asking, essentially, have you been vaccinated? And if you answer no, then they want to, not so much why not, but do you have any questions on the vaccine? Why? Seeking to dispel a lot of the myths and the misinformation that has circulated and that exists. That is the objective, not to force people to be able to be inoculated, etc.
Yeah, one of the things that that's about that is, you remember, this was over the smallpox, and smallpox had been devastating people for, centuries, right? And so many people had died from it. So in the late 18th century, the 1700s, somebody, I forget his name, he came up with the vaccine for it. And many people, even though this disease was just killing people off left and right, kids, teenagers, young adults, killing them off left and right, nobody wanted to take the vaccine. And so there was this thing about, oh, we don't want to take it. And people were like, oh, the side effects and this and that. So the arguments then were the arguments the same. And one of the things that's particular about it, the one slide that you pulled up, you can see that from some people have begun to say, hey, this is a precursor to the mark of the beast. And so they looked at the government saying, hey, trying to get the people to take the vaccine. And as a matter of fact, the vaccine has saved a lot of lives, by the way. And probably the thoughts that they had, oh, the vaccine is going to do this, it's going to do that, it's going to have these side effects. Well, we see the results. So we understand the fears of the people was something that they conjured up in their own minds. It wasn't reality. Do you hear about smallpox today ravaging communities, ravaging young people? You don't hear about that. What's also interesting is people that are so against vaccines took vaccines from since they were an infant all the way up to, if you went to public school, you got shots, and for those who went in the military, you got a whole bunch of shots. So if they were trying to kill off people and these things were so harmful, y'all really messed up. We done took that stuff from kids all the way up. Now, all of a sudden, because of the explosion of the internet, everybody's afraid of vaccines. People put all sorts of dangerous things in their bodies, yet they're so opposed to this. But when you look at that historically, people then were trying to connect that with the mark of the beast. Now, again, we understand now, hindsight, was there any truth to what they were saying? No. It was just the fears of the people being aroused. Our liberties are being infringed upon and so forth. So history is repeating itself. Now, we need to understand about this mark of the beast issue, because what was going on at the same time that was happening was that you had an organization called the WTCU. Maybe some of you have heard me stress this before. And it was the Women's Temperance Christian Union. And now these women were for certain reforms, right? And one of them was prohibition. And so they were against the legalization of alcohol because they felt that alcohol would really bring down the morals of the nations. Look in hindsight, were they right? Yes, they were. Imagine, you don't just have liquor stores on every corner. Imagine the beatings that wives have taken. Imagine the abuse that children have taken. Imagine just the accidents, the brawls, the fights that's been liquor induced. Imagine you remove that from society. So that's what they were against. So at one time in America, I know some of you, it's hard for you to fathom or believe it, but at one time in America, alcohol was prohibited. It was illegal. People were getting arrested for selling liquor. And so at that time, they were trying to push for the legalization of liquor, and certain politicians were being paid off to promote it. And so this organization rose up to speak against it. So connected with this temperance work, also what went hand in hand with it, they were beckoning because they saw the morals of society going down. So they said they started to push for God to be reinstated in society, and they thought to do that by enforcing certain laws, particularly and forcing people to go to church on Sunday. If people honored Sunday by making these Sunday laws, then they felt that, hey, we can bring the morals back up because we're having this push for alcohol. Apparently the morals of society is going down, and they saw the devastating effects that it would have. So then because of that, they begin to push legislation for this Sunday law. So the temperance movement and the Sunday movement historically went hand in hand. And we know that in the last days, it's going to be not because of a vaccine, but and notice, who were the ones pushing it? It was the politicians, the government that was being paid off, that were pushing for the legalization of the alcoholic beverages. But it was the Protestants that were pushing for these laws to be passed. Now, if you look at the situation with the vaccines today, well, people say, well, the government is pushing it. But you have a lot of Protestants, they are against this vaccine issue. It's interesting that a lot of the Protestants, they're writing exemption letters for their congregation, and they're really speaking out against it. And so when you really look at it, when you look at Revelation 13, the Bible talks about the false prophet, right? Oh, that's Revelation 13. But we understand that false prophet is in connection with Revelation 13, that lamb-like beast having the two horns. And so we understand that false prophet to be apostate Protestantism. And so it is from the Protestant world, the Christian community, that are looking at what's going on in our world, and they're looking at the moral depravity that's all around. And abortion might be an issue, but all the killings, liquor drinking, drug usage, all of these things that are going, homosexuality just spreading like wildfire everywhere. So they're looking at these things, and coupled with some of the COVIDs, some of the natural disasters, the hurricanes, Ida that's ravaging certain places, they're looking at these things, and they're going to start equating and saying, well, these things are happening. These are judgments from God because of the lax morals in America. So we need to get back to God, and therefore we're going to go push the government to do these things. The government doesn't take the initiative in that issue. It's the church that does it. And so people that should understand their Bibles shouldn't. Remember, we ought to be guided by two things: true theology and common sense. And it's interesting that for many of us in the remnant, we've thrown out true theology because we're pointing at something that is not coming from that direction, and we're losing our common sense as well in dealing with the vaccine. And so history bears out that it wasn't the vaccine that linked us with the mark of the beast, because at that same time, you had these Christian organizations with temperance, promoting temperance, that also coupled with that were pushing for the government to legislate religious laws.
When we consider the fact that, again, the scripture is clear in that there's no warning against, quote unquote, a vaccine and so forth. But we read an inspiration that Protestants are going to be foremost when we're informing this image to the beast. And so they're going to go after that. When we look in Revelation chapter 13, it's that lamb-like beast that says to all that dwell upon the earth that they should make this image to the beast that had this wound by a sword and did live. Again, that's referring us back into to what Protestant America is going to do leading out. So this is all over worship, and as you pointed out, the issue again is not in terms of quote health as such. Now, again, from a church standpoint, people look at any crisis, any event that takes place, and they want to make this is it. I can see how this is going to lead into this, like a domino effect. And that's really what everything that happens, like 9/11. Okay, well, I can see how that could lead into this. Y2K, I can see how that can lead into this. The new president that has come into office. Joe Biden. Well, what he's Catholic, and Catholics don't believe in quote separation church and state. I can see how that can lead into this. Everything is a catalyst, but that comes, unfortunately, it comes from not simply reading scripture and understanding what scripture is saying. When we read that the movement to be able to enforce the mark of the beast, it makes its way in quote secrecy or in darkness. Some people take that as it's like a covert operation, and it's only discussed like in wee hours of the morning in some dark dungeon somewhere with the people burning candles and Illuminati and so forth. And this is what it's talking about. That's not what it's talking about, folks. All it's simply saying is that the people who are quote pushing for this, they don't understand where it's going. They're thinking it's going to accomplish one thing, but it's going to end up accomplishing something else. And just as you gave history as a lesson to be able to look at, that was not something that was in secret. That was publicly debated. It wasn't like, nobody heard about it and then one morning they woke up and looked in the front page of the newspaper and it's like, this Blair bill is about to pass. And they're like, oh man, where'd this come from? That was not the case. This was public information, highly agitated and being discussed throughout the country. Okay, so again, banish the notion that it's a secrecy under lock and key that nobody knows about it. That's not what the reference is suggesting. Again, it's just that people don't know where it's tending. They really think, as you talked about, that they are going to help to bring about a better moral climate in America. Not only a moral climate, but even an economic climate, by making these religious laws and so forth that will enforce papal observance. But they're really going to be doing just the opposite. Okay, and so again, history is an indicator because that's what we learn from history. And when we looked at the issue, as you mentioned, with smallpox, again, that was nothing at all to do with quote the implementation or the forcing of the mark of the beast. It was simply over health and safety. As a matter of fact, when you look in 1885 and this the rioting that took place then in Montreal, there were a number of people who felt that even as doctors, they were co-signing and saying that the quote vaccines that they will cause this disease and they'll cause this person to die and so forth. Now, we already talked about that before. Unfortunately, there are some adverse effects that some people can have, but overall is not the case. You have over, millions of people who have been inoculated. Well, if the vaccines are killing people, it'd be like immediately. Now, I guess there's a caveat because some person was saying that, well, it's going to take like 2 to 3 years to kill people off. It's like, well, what kind of idiot made something that could, that has to wait 2 years to kill a person off? Let's get it over with. And again, if it's to kill off a certain race of people or a certain group of people, then you have to have everybody on different levels buying off on this, on this conspiracy, where essentially at the rudimentary or the basic level, you need to have a nurse there to look at the vials of a vaccine, so that if a person is Black comes in, because, again, depending on the race, but we're Black, so we're talking, if they're Black, you need to give them a vial marked B. Well, guess what? If I'm the nurse and you come in and you Black, I'm like, hey, give me the one marked B. Isn't that going to make me start thinking? But then again, you get twisted with that whole notion and so forth, as to making it something that it is not. So history, again, attests to it from the 1800s, from the 1900s, and many of those things that we talked about were viruses. They're no longer as prevalent today. Some have been eradicated. Now, some have come back because in the last probably 30 years or so, many people have become, quote, anti-vaxxers, like it's nothing new. Now, again, no new thing under the sun. So I want to show you something that was from 1902. So this is from the Anti-Vaccination Society of America. You thought this was new. Now, in the early 2000s, I was very much against vaccines. And where did I get it from? I got it from information from a friend came and he was like, you don't need vaccines. And I thought about it at the time, like, yeah, that makes sense, because if your body is healthy, why would you introduce a foreign agent to your body? You're strong enough, your immune system strong enough, so forth. Most immune systems are not quote unquote strong enough. We did talk about some things you can do to help to boost your immune system. But if you've been treating your body horribly, now is not the time to quote unquote just say, okay, I'm going to take a chance at it. In 1902, it says like the Anti-Vaccination Society of America, otherwise an association of half-mad, misguided people who write and toil and dream of a time to come when it shall be lawful to retain intact the pure body Mother Nature gave, sends greetings to a quote suspect. Liberty cannot be given, it must be taken. Okay. Does that sound similar to, again, what people are echoing today and so forth? Say absolutely, just a page from the past. This one quickly says vaccination accursed. Eczema from vaccination, innocent victor of the vaccinator's lance. Now, keep in mind too, that during this period, things of hygiene are not the same as what we talked about. Salk and Pasteur and so forth, these guys begin to determine, understand germs. In the 1800s, one of the reasons that so many people died during the Civil War is that a surgeon would basically perform a surgery on one person, keep the same bloody garments on, use the same knife or axe, and carry those same tools to the next person, and did that all day long. Today, you wouldn't even dream of that. Today it's like, one procedure, and then it's moved on. You go to the dentist, they don't share the tools with somebody else. You look and see, is it sterilized and so forth. This is where people were. They begin to understand and to do better. So that is also a reason that it would lead somewhat to cross infections and so forth. But this was an idea though. Okay, vaccination is accursed. That was, again, put out by a doctor. All right, so it's not something that's just made up. Then vaccination condemned. These are different doctors, quote unquote, who signed off. In my opinion, vaccination affords no protection against smallpox. Right, where is smallpox today? So if Dr. Creighton could be raised up, it's like, okay, you're gonna have to eat your words, buddy. Vaccination should not be practiced. I see no justification for it, etc. Again, that was around the issue of smallpox and so forth. Then at the bottom, you see 1,010 children have been killed by vaccination in England and Wales, according to the admissions of medical men themselves. So again, we talked about before correlation and causation. Very quickly, correlation is different from quote unquote causation. Now, causation means what caused it. Correlation is maybe, is it related? And so there in the summertime, there is a spike or a relationship between ice cream and drownings. And when I said that before to some people, that's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because people eat ice cream and then they jump in the swimming pool and then they drown. No, that does not cause people to drown. Okay, that's a myth, a wives' tale, that you get a cramp from quote eating and getting in the pool. Okay, plenty of research has been done. It's not the case whatsoever. All right, so there's no relation there. But in the summertime, essentially, you have it's hotter. So when it's hot, people are going to buy ice cream because it's a cool drink. A cool treat. When it's hot, people want to go swimming. So again, there's quote unquote the casual correlation between the two, but is one cause the other? Does drinking or eating ice cream cause drownings? It does not. So if you looked at a graph, which you could see here, you will see that quote unquote, the numbers coincide. They go up and they go down. People, they're not related. So again, the same is also true in this. Lastly, again, quote, the Salk vaccine must not be licensed. Again, we talked about Dr. Salk, or Jonas Salk, and this contribution for polio. Today, you don't have polio. In most countries, it has been eliminated. What caused it? People eating better? No, people not eating any better. What caused it? Taking garlic? No, that is not eliminated. It's eliminated from the mere fact of, okay, enough people were inoculated or vaccinated against it, and so it did not spread. Lastly, there's again a note there, vaccination. Okay, that and there's a quote from the Bible, that in Ramah, there was a voice heard, lamentations and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and would not be comforted because they are not. Okay, and so 20,000 victims will be vaccinated within the next 10 days in the city under the present alarm. And that's going to put money into the pockets of the medical profession. There's money in it. Vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate. Okay, so you see a picture of the skeleton trying to put in the poison into the baby to kill off the baby because people are making money. Now, we've been talking a lot about Revelation, and one thing we didn't talk about was in Revelation chapter 18. And in Revelation chapter 18, the Bible talks about the sorceries that Babylon practices. And the word there is pharmakia. And so people just run crazy with it. They say, well, pharmakia, that's where we get the word pharmacy for. And so people are making quote unquote pharmacists. They're practicing witchcraft. They're practicing sorcery. And therefore drugs are from the sorcerer. Okay. Again, folks, words are important to be able to look at. But words have different meanings in different generations. And so when we were growing up, in the 70s and 80s, gay was just meant, the 40s and 50s, it meant happy. Okay, when you got into the 80s and 90s, it was transitioning to being a person that was homosexual. So if you read an old book that was from the 17 or 1800s, and you read quote unquote gay, it's going to have a different understanding. Some books it talks about Greece. And so we think of Greece, we think of like canola, vegetable and so forth. But in times in which it was written, Greece was talking about, an animal product, lard, fat, and so forth. So a different meaning. So quote unquote, the notion of pharmakia, sorcery. No, this is not sorcery. This is using science. And you mentioned again, hey, use common sense in science, theology. Science is there that you can have a demonstrable effect. Now, granted, there's some things that we can't prove in science. You can't quote prove that there's God. All right, so we believe and understand there's evidence. Obviously, we can certainly look at in the world to attest that there is a creator. But we don't have quote God showing up. We don't. So some people say, well, we reject it. No, science has a relevance. It has a basis. So good science should be in line with Scripture. And so science again is not saying that this is quote pharmakia and this is a spell that's being cast on the world. Nothing at all of that. There will come an issue of the mark of the beast, but this is certainly not it. And as we understand the Scriptures and we understand that every issue that arises is not quote unquote a mark of the beast. There are different things that will arise. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24 that there were different issues and troubles that will come upon society, but he said, look, the end is not yet. That this is one event, maybe of many that will transpire. And as we look at COVID, this is one event of a string of different pestilences and diseases that have come upon the earth that will become more and more frequent. The more we come, quote unquote, under the curse of disregarding the laws of nature, disregarding the law of God, we'll see disasters increasing and intensifying, just reminding us of the frailty of life, the shortness of time, and the soon coming of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, well, that's our time for the day. I had something else I was going to say, but I'm not going to say it. This is what I'm going to do. If we get enough likes and enough comments saying, hey, we want another video addressing this, we'll address it. So we'll let you determine whether or not we do another video addressing this, because I have some other things I could say really dealing with and addressing that issue, but I'm not going to share it unless, we're going to let the people decide. But again, that's our time for today. Remember the true proverb, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life.